The silence in my office was a tangible thing, a reward for surviving another brutal quarter. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office at Ethereum Motors, glinting off the polished chrome model of our first production car. I was elbow-deep in supply chain logistics, trying to find a way to shave cents off a capacitor without compromising quality, when the door burst open. It was Leo, my assistant. But it wasn't Leo. His face, usually a mask of calm efficiency, was bleached of all color. His tie was crooked and he was breathing like he'd sprinted the entire length of the production floor. Theo Vance, he gasped, bracing himself against the door frame. A cold trickle of dread, entirely separate from the air conditioning, traced a path down my spine. Leo? What is it? Speak to me. The Argo, at the expo. He squeezed his eyes shut as if trying to block out an image. There was an incident. A very loud. An incident? What kind of incident? I was on my feet now, my chair rolling back and hitting the window with a soft thud. The Argo was our crown jewel, the concept car destined to redefine the luxury electric market at the Milan Auto Expo. It was supposed to be the culmination of a decade of work. An explosion, ma'am. The words fell into the room like stones. In the prototype bay. The Argo, it erupted. My mind snagged on a single horrifying detail. The bay. Who was in the bay? Leo's gaze met mine and the sheer, unvarnished pity in his eyes made my knees weak. Arthur and Marco. They were running a final diagnostic. They didn't get out, Alara. They're gone. The world didn't slow down. Chattered. The phone in my hand, I hadn't even realized I was still holding it, slipped from my numb fingers and hit the Italian marble floor, the screen cracking into a spiderweb of fractures. The sound was obscenely loud. Arthur Chin and Marco Rossi. The names echoed in the sudden void inside my head. Arthur with his meticulous spreadsheets and encyclopedic knowledge of polymer composites. Marco the fiery Italian who could diagnose an engine fault by sound alone. I'd wooed them from BMW and Ferrari respectively, not just with obscene signing bonuses but with a promise. A promise to build something beautiful, something perfect without the corporate bureaucracy that had stifled them. They were my first hires, my mentors, my friends. We'd spent countless nights in that very bay, surviving on cold pizza and burning the midnight oil to solve impossible problems. No, the word was a breath, a prayer, a denial. That's not possible, Leo. You're mistaken. I was just down there. 2 hours ago. They were fine. Marco was complaining about the coffee. Arthur was humming some awful 80s power ballad. They were fine. He just shook his head, a single devastating tear tracking through the dust on his cheek. I wish I was. I saw the aftermath. The need to see for myself to disprove this nightmare was a physical compulsion. I moved towards the door, my legs feeling like they were made of lead and rubber. Take me there. Now. The walk to the prototype development wing, a journey I'd made 1,000 times, felt like a descent into another world. The usual hum of machinery was gone, replaced by a deafening silence punctuated by the distant wail of sirens growing closer. The air, usually smelling of ozone, fresh rubber and welding, grew thick with an acrid, metallic tang. And underneath it something else. Something sweet and foul and organic that made my stomach clench. Then we turned the corner and I saw it. The pristine white climate-controlled bay was a vision of hell. Black scorch marks radiated out from a central point where the Argo had once sat on its display turntable. Now it was a grotesque sculpture of twisted, blackened metal and melted carbon fiber. Tools were scattered like shrapnel. The reinforced glass walls were webbed with cracks. And the smell. That sweet foul smell was stronger here. It was the smell of burnt plastic, of melted wiring, and of something infinitely worse. Burnt fat. My brain made the connection before I could stop it, and a wave of nausea so violent hit me that I stumbled, grabbing onto Leo's arm to keep from falling. I leaned against the scorched wall, my body convulsing, vomiting nothing but acid and fear onto the ruined floor. 2 white sheets lay near the bay entrance, covering shapes that were all wrong. Too small, too incomplete. A security manager, his face grim, approached. Theo Vance. The remains, we've moved them. Would you like to? I couldn't speak. I just shook my head, a frantic jerky motion. I couldn't. I wouldn't remember them like that. I wanted to remember Marco's booming laugh, Arthur's quiet smile. Not whatever was under those sheets. My hand, trembling uncontrollably, fumbled in my blazer pocket for my phone before I remembered it was shattered on my office floor. My phone. I need to call the police. This is a crime scene. Leo's hand on my arm was surprisingly firm. Alara, wait. Just then a familiar voice cut through the chaos. Alara. My God, are you all right? Kalen. My husband, Kalen Reed. Co-founder of Ethereum. President of Operations. He looked as impeccable as ever in his tailored suit, but his handsome face was etched with a convincing mask of concern. He strode towards me and pulled me into a tight embrace. For a second I collapsed into him, the solid familiarity of him a lifeline in the roaring chaos. I came as soon as I heard, he murmured into my hair. It's a tragedy. A horrible, horrible tragedy. The police, Kalen, I mumbled into his shoulder. We have to call them. Something caused this. Something went terribly wrong. He held me at arm's length, his hands on my shoulders. His eyes, a piercing blue I had once fallen in love with, were full of earnest pleading. Alara, think what that will do. The investigation, the media frenzy, the headlines. Ethereum's death trap. Our stock just went public. We have thousands of employees whose livelihoods depend on us. We can't let 2 lives destroy thousands more. The words sounded reasonable. They sounded like the pragmatic company-first thinking that had made him such a brilliant operations lead. But they felt like ice water in my veins. 2 lives. I whispered, pulling back from him. Kalen, that's Arthur and Marco. They are Ethereum. And we will honor them, he insisted, his voice low and intense. We will compensate their families so generously they will never want for anything. We will set up a foundation in their names. But we do it quietly with dignity. Not with a public circus that destroys everything we've built. What happened is done. Now we must protect the living. He was so sure, so persuasive. The part of me that was CEO, the part that had fought for every inch of this company's success, understood his logic. But the other part, the part that had shared pizza with those 2 men, recoiled. I looked from his pleading face to the white sheets, to the ruins of our dream car. The acrid smell of death was still in my nostrils. His words, 2 lives, echoed, feeling hollow and cruel. No, I said, my voice stronger now. No, Kalen. A car doesn't just explode. If there's a fault, a real fault, it's not a circus. It's a reckoning. We owe them that. We owe everyone that. I turned to Leo. Call them. Now. I saw a flash of something in Kalen's eyes then. Not disappointment, but something sharper, hotter. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a mask of resigned sadness. I hope you know what you're doing, Alara. As the first police cars screeched into the compound, their lights painting the scene in flashes of blue and red, I stood my ground. But a new, deeper chill had settled in my bones. It wasn't just from the tragedy. It was from the look in my husband's eyes when I defied him. For the first time in our marriage, I felt like I was standing opposite an adversary, not a partner. And I couldn't shake the feeling that the explosion in the bay was just the first detonation. Others were yet to come. The police moved in with a grim, efficient energy that was a stark contrast to the stunned paralysis that had gripped Ethereum. The prototype bay was cordoned off with official yellow tape that screamed crime scene. Do not cross, a brutal verdict on our pristine facility. Detectives in nondescript windbreakers began the slow, meticulous process of cataloging the nightmare, their voices low and professional, their eyes missing nothing. I gave my statement in a daze, seated in my own office which now felt like an alien space. I recounted my last conversation with Arthur and Marco, the diagnostic they were running, the general state of the Argo. I told them everything except for Kalen's plea not to call them. That felt like a marital betrayal, and some deeply ingrained instinct to present a united front even now kept me silent. After the detectives left, Leo hovered by the door. The families, he began, his voice thick. I'll call them myself, I said, the words ash in my mouth. It was the least I could do, the most horrific duty I could imagine. How do you tell a wife, children, that their husband and father isn't coming home because the thing he dedicated his life to building had killed him? But when I called Arthur's wife, Lena, her grief was muffled, strangely distant. Thank you, Alara. Kalen already called. He's been so generous. We don't want any trouble. Marco's brother in Milan said much the same. Kaylin Reed has taken care of everything. The compensation, it is more than sufficient. We are a private family. We wish to grieve in peace. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. Kaylin had moved fast. Impossibly fast. Generous compensation negotiated and delivered within hours of their deaths? It felt less like generosity and more like a transaction. A silencing. My next call was to our head of legal. David, I want to know the terms of the settlement Kaylin arranged with the Chin and Rossi families. Full disclosure to my eyes only. An hour later the email arrived. The numbers made me dizzy. It was more than generous. It was astronomical. A life-changing sum for each family deposited immediately. Attached were signed documents from both families, formally stating they did not hold Ethereum Motors responsible and requesting privacy and no further police investigation. They had effectively shut it down. I sat back, the cold from the marble floor seeming to seep up through the desk and into my bones. Kaylin hadn't just been prepared to avoid the police. He had a plan to neuter their investigation before it even began. He'd bought their silence and he'd done it with company money. The following days were a blur of hollow corporate motions. Press statements crafted by PR to be vague and mournful. An internal memo urging calm and resilience. Through it all, Kaylin was the picture of grieving leadership. Somber, steady, focused on healing and moving forward. He avoided any discussion of the cause, deftly steering conversations toward the future. But I couldn't move forward. The question screamed in my head every waking moment. Why? Why would a state-of-the-art battery system, one we'd stress-tested 1,000 times, simply explode? I spent my days buried in the engineering schematics, the stress test results, the material sourcing logs for the Argo. I was chasing a ghost, looking for a flaw I knew couldn't exist. Our protocols were too strict, our checks and balances too rigorous. It was late on the third night, the office dark except for the pool of light from my desk lamp, when Leo entered quietly. He'd been my shadow through this, a silent, supportive presence. But now he looked nervous, his eyes darting towards the door. Alara, there's something. But you have to understand this is just rumor. Whispers from the procurement department. I put down the schematic I'd been staring at for an hour without seeing. Tell me. He took a deep breath. The explosion. The initial theory from the fire department points to a catastrophic failure in the battery cell housing. A pressure rupture. I know that much, I said impatient. The containment shell shouldn't have failed. The alloy is rated for 10 times the pressure our tests generated. That's just it, Leo said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. The rumor is, about 6 weeks ago, a sourcing order was signed off. It switched the supplier for that specific titanium alloy. From our established certified vendor to a new one. A cheaper one. The air left my lungs. Changing a core material supplier was a monumental decision. It required sign-off from engineering, quality assurance, and operations. Kaylin's department. It required my sign-off. And I'd never seen such a request. That's impossible, Leo. I sign every component change. Especially for a critical stress component like that. I never approved a new vendor. He looked down at his shoes. The order was signed by President Reed. Under the new Emergency Procurement Authority he implemented last quarter. I remembered that. He'd argued that for speed and agility, especially with the Expo bearing down on us, he needed the authority to make swift sourcing decisions for non-critical path items. I'd agreed with the strict caveat that any change to critical safety systems still came to me. He had bypassed me. He had broken our agreement. Who is the new supplier? My voice was barely audible. Leo told me. I'd never heard of them. A quick search on my company dashboard revealed they were a shell company, only months old with a murky ownership history. And their quality assurance certifications were forgeries. The pieces slammed together with a force that made me dizzy. He had single-handedly switched a critical component to a substandard cut-rate supplier. He had bypassed me to do it. He had introduced the flaw that killed Arthur and Marco. The why was a gaping hole. For profit? A kickback from the sham company? To sabotage the company? Nothing made sense. As if reading my mind, Leo spoke again, even more hesitant now. There's more. The person in procurement who processed the order. They said President Reed was very insistent. and that he's been spending a lot of time with a new assistant he hired. A young woman. They say she looks. She looks what, Leo? The question came out as a cold snap. He met my gaze, miserable. They say she looks like you. Like you did when you were 22. The world didn't just tilt, it inverted. The cut-rate supplier, the bypassed protocols, the dead engineers, the bought silence. It all connected to a single vile point. It wasn't just about money or power. It was about a cliché. A midlife crisis dressed up in a face that mirrored my own youth. He had risked everything, lives, our company, our marriage, for a cheap imitation and a cheaper part. A fury, white-hot and pure, burned through the grief and shock. I stood up, my body thrumming with this new terrible knowledge. Thank you, Leo. That will be all. Elara, what are you going to do? I looked out the window at the darkened campus of the company we had built together. I said, my voice terrifyingly calm, I'm going to pay a visit to my husband's office. The game had changed. The grieving CEO was gone. Now the hunt was on. The walk to Kalen's wing of the executive floor felt different this time. It wasn't a journey through a company we built. It was a reconnaissance mission into enemy territory. The modern art on the walls, the polished floors, the silent, efficient hum of the climate control, it all felt like a facade, a beautifully constructed lie. His executive assistant, a competent woman named Sarah who had been with us for years, looked up in surprise as I approached. CEO Vance. President Reed is in a budget meeting with. I'm sure he is, I said, my voice not inviting argument. I didn't break stride, pushing open the heavy oak door to his office and closing it softly behind me. The room was a testament to Kalen's taste. Dark wood, leather, masculine and imposing. It was also empty. My eyes scanned the space, not with the familiarity of a wife, but with the cold detachment of a forensic accountant. There on his desk was the prominent silver-framed photo from our wedding day. We looked so young, so blindingly optimistic, our whole lives ahead of us. The irony was a physical pain. My gaze swept past it, looking for anything, any clue. And then I saw her. A young woman was sitting in Kalen's high-backed leather chair, her feet, adorned with ridiculously expensive designer heels, propped up on his desk. She was scrolling through her phone, humming a tune I vaguely recognized as one Kalen liked. She was stunning with long dark hair and sharp, intelligent features. And Leo was right. He was me. Or rather, she was a photograph of my 22-year-old self come to life. The resemblance was uncanny, down to the slight tilt of her head. But it was a copy, a replica. Where my eyes held the weight of a decade of struggle and triumph, hers held a vacant, petulant entitlement. She was wearing a white dress that was both outrageously expensive and slightly too revealing for the office. She hadn't noticed me yet. I took a moment to just watch this phantom, this doppelganger whose existence suddenly explained so much. This was the distraction. This was the shiny object for which Kalen had traded his integrity, our marriage and two men's lives. Finally she looked up. A brilliant, practiced smile flashed across her face. Kalen, darling, did you forget your? The smile vanished when she saw it was me. It was replaced not by fear or guilt, but by a slow, appraising insolence. She didn't remove her feet from the desk. Oh. It's you. She said it like I was the intruder. The imitation. It's me, I said, my voice flat. And you are. She slowly, deliberately swung her feet off the desk and stood up, smoothing her dress. She was taller than me. Younger. I'm Sloan. President Reed's executive liaison. She said the title like it was a royal proclamation. An executive liaison, I repeated. I sign off on every executive hire. I don't recall your name. Her confidence flickered for a microsecond. It was an direct appointment. By President Reed. For expediency. She was parroting his words, his justification for bypassing protocol. I took a step further into the room, my eyes still scanning. I noticed a sweater draped over a chair in the corner. It wasn't Kalen's style. It was pink cashmere. Hers. She'd made herself at home. Expediency seems to be the word of the day, I said, circling the desk. I casually reached down and pressed the power button on his desktop computer. I need to access a procurement file. Sloane's eyes tracked me, wary now. His computer is password protected. Sensitive financials. I'm sure it is, I said, sitting in his chair. It was still warm from her. The thought made my skin crawl. I typed in my own password, the date we'd founded Ethereum. The computer whirred to life, granting me full access. His trust, our shared history, now a weapon to use against him. Sloane's lips tightened into a thin line. I pulled up the supplier database, my fingers flying across the keyboard. I found it quickly, the order for the titanium alloy. Signed by Kalen Reed. Authorization code. Override his. He'd used a code named after me to bypass me. The sheer gall of it took my breath away. I could feel Sloane hovering behind me. He's not going to like you being in his things, she said, a petty threat in her voice. I ignored her, printing out the damning document. The printer hummed in the corner. As the pages slid out, I got up and walked to the large cabinet behind his desk where he kept his current project files. I knew this office as well as my own. That's a restricted cabinet, Sloane said, her voice rising. I'm aware, I said, pulling open the drawer labeled Geo Expo. It should have been filled with technical schematics and logistics plans. Instead, it was empty except for a few lingerie catalogs and a half-empty bottle of very expensive vodka. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just an affair. This was a desecration. He had turned the sacred ground of our company, our shared dream, into his personal party room. I turned to face her. The printed pages were warm in my hand. Get out, I said, my voice low and deadly calm. She blinked, feigning confusion. I'm sorry. You heard me. Get out of this office. Get out of this building. You're fired. A smirk touched her lips. It was a look of pure triumph. You can't fire me. I don't work for you. I work for Kalen. And he's not going to let you. She took a step closer, and that's when I saw it. The faint, shiny line of a recent surgical scar near her hairline. A nose job? Cheek implants? She hadn't just happened to look like me. She'd been sculpted to mimic me. The revelation was so bizarre, so grotesque that I almost laughed. He hadn't just found a mistress. He'd commissioned a replica. He let you change a parts supplier, didn't he? I held up the printed order. He let you play executive, and 2 men are dead because of it. Do you even understand that? Their blood is on your cheap shoes. For the first time, a crack appeared in her armor. A flicker of fear. But it was quickly replaced by a vicious anger. Those old men. That was an accident. A workplace incident. Kalen took care of it. He took care of their families. He takes care of me. Something you've obviously forgotten how to do. You're so busy being the brilliant Sue that you forgot to be his wife. Her words were meant to wound, and they did. They found the secret shame I'd been carrying for months. The guilt of being consumed by work, of neglecting our relationship. But she'd weaponized my guilt, and Kalen had loaded the gun. He spent hundreds of millions to cover for you, I said, watching her closely. That's quite a price tag. You must be very special. She preened, mistaking my disgust for jealousy. He loves me. He says I'm everything you were before you became this. She gestured dismissively at my tailored suit, my tired eyes. That was it. The final, twisted piece of the puzzle. Kalen didn't just want a young woman. He wanted the young, adoring, less successful version of me he could control. He wanted to own the prototype, not the finished product. The door opened and Kalen strode in, all energy and purpose. Sloane, darling, did you get the figures for the... He stopped dead, his eyes darting from my face to Sloane's to the papers in my hand. His smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating mask. Elara. What a surprise. His voice was smooth, but his eyes were darting around the room, assessing the damage. I bet it is, I said, not moving. We were just discussing expediency. And cost-cutting measures. And the fact that Sloane here is no longer employed by Ethereum. Sloane immediately fluttered to his side, tears welling in her eyes. A perfect performance. Kalen, she was going through your private files. She threatened me. Kalen put a protective arm around her, his gaze fixed on me. It was a declaration of war. Elara, I think you're upset. Grieving. You're not thinking clearly. Why don't you go home? We can talk about this later. He was dismissing me. In my own company. While holding his mistress. I held up the purchase order. We can talk about this right now, Kalen. You signed an order for a substandard alloy from a shell company. It failed. You killed Arthur and Marco. You bypassed me. You lied to me. He didn't even flinch. He just looked bored. Those are very serious allegations from a very stressed woman. That supplier was vetted. The part was certified. It was a tragic accident, not a conspiracy. As for Sloan, her appointment is within my purview. Your attempt to fire her is an overreach of your authority. The gaslighting was breathtaking. He was rewriting reality right in front of me. I'm taking this to the board, I said, my voice shaking with rage. A slow smile spread across his face. It was a cruel, victorious smile. You do that, darling. But ask yourself, who are they going to believe? The hysterical, grieving woman who's clearly overwhelmed? Or the calm, pragmatic president who just secured the company's future and handled a tragedy with decisive efficiency? The man with the flawless operational record. He had me. He'd planned for this. He'd positioned himself perfectly, making me look emotional and unstable while he was the steady hand. The board, mostly old-school men who already thought I was too emotional for the engineering side, would eat it up. I looked at him, at this stranger I had married, standing there with his bought and paid for replica of me. The love I had for him didn't just die. It was annihilated, replaced by a cold, hard diamond of hatred. Without another word, I turned and walked out, the purchase order crumpled in my fist. I had the truth. But truth, I realized, was worthless without power. I had to get it back. And I knew exactly where to start. The silence in my own office was deafening after the confrontation in Kalen's. The crumpled purchase order felt like a live grenade in my hand. I smoothed it out on my glass desk, the official Ethereum header, Kalen's flamboyant signature, the part number for a component that had become a murder weapon. It was all there. Evidence. But as Kalen had so smugly pointed out, evidence was nothing without a narrative to support it. And he had spent the last week carefully crafting his. The competent leader versus the hysterical widow. I couldn't go to the board. Not yet. They'd see my pain as instability, my fury as a lack of control. I needed something undeniable. I needed to understand the full scope of his betrayal. Leo found me like that, staring at the piece of paper as if it could reveal its secrets. He took one look at my face and closed the door softly behind him. It's true then, he said, not a question. It's true, I confirmed, my voice hollow. And it's worse. He's involved with her. The assistant. Sloan. He's created this entire shadow life, Leo. Right under our noses. Leo's face tightened with disgust. What do you want to do? I looked up at him, the plan forming in my mind, cold and sharp. I want to burn it all down. I spent the next hour on the phone with David, our head of legal, but I wasn't asking about the family's settlements anymore. I was asking about corporate structure, about my authority as CEO and majority shareholder versus Kalen's as president. I was asking about the legality of his emergency procurement authority. I was building a case not for the board but for a war. Meanwhile, I had Leo do what he did best. Dig. Quietly, discreetly, he reached out to contacts in procurement and quality assurance. The picture that emerged was uglier than I could have imagined. The switch to the substandard supplier wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern. Over the past 6 months, Kalen had used his emergency authority to change dozens of suppliers for critical components, all to cheaper, often unverified alternatives. The kickbacks must have been enormous. He wasn't just skimming, he was systematically gutting the quality of our cars for personal profit. The Argos explosion was just the first, most violent failure. Others were inevitable. The scale of the betrayal was so vast it was almost incomprehensible. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was methodically poisoning the company we had built from the ground up, trading its soul for cash to fund his new life with his new toy. A new, more terrifying thought occurred to me. Our daughter. Our 7-year-old Lily. Was she just another part of the life he was willing to trade away? That evening I left work early for the first time in years. The ride home felt surreal. The sprawling, minimalist house we owned in Hillsborough, a monument to our success, now felt like a beautiful trap. I found Lily in the playroom, building an elaborate spaceship out of Lego, her small face furrowed in concentration. "Mommy," she yelled, launching herself at me. I caught her, burying my face in her hair, breathing in the scent of baby shampoo and innocence. It was the only thing that could momentarily pierce the icy shell forming around my heart. Kalen came home late, smelling of expensive whiskey and a faint, cloying perfume that wasn't mine. He performed the role of concerned husband perfectly, asking about my day, pretending the showdown in his office hadn't happened. Over a dinner I couldn't eat, Lily chattered about school. Then she went quiet for a moment, looking at her father. Daddy, Miss Evans said we shouldn't use our phones at the dinner table. It's not polite. Kalen looked up from his phone, where he'd been texting incessantly under the table. He forced a smile. You're absolutely right, Pumpkin. Daddy's just very busy. Lily, in her devastating childhood honesty, pressed on. Is it the lady with the torn clothes? Is she poor? Is that why you have to help her? The fork slipped from Kalen's hand, clattering loudly on his plate. The color drained from his face. What lady, sweetheart? On your phone, Lily said, oblivious to the tension she'd just unleashed. The lady in the picture. Her dress was all ripped. Like she couldn't afford a new one. My blood turned to ice. Sloane. He was showing Lily pictures of Sloane. The grotesquerie of it, the sheer disrespect, stole the breath from my lungs. The woman he was cheating with, the woman whose whims had gotten people killed, was being presented to our daughter. I stood up, my chair scraping back. Lily, darling, why don't you go finish your Lego? Mommy and Daddy need to talk. Once she was gone, the silence in the dining room was explosive. Kalen was the first to speak, his voice a low, furious hiss. What have you been saying to her? Me. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. I haven't said a thing. She has eyes, Kalen. She's 7, not stupid. She sees you glued to your phone. She sees you're not here even when you're physically present. I am under an immense amount of stress, Elara, he shot back, standing up to loom over me. The company is in crisis because you couldn't let a simple accident go. You had to call the police, you had to stir the pot. Now I'm trying to keep this entire ship from sinking, and you're turning my daughter against me. The projection was masterful. He was the victim. I was the hysteric. I was the problem. This isn't about the company, Kalen, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. This is about you. Your choices. Your lies. You're a whore. The word hung in the air, ugly and final. His mask slipped completely then. All the practiced charm and feigned concern vanished, replaced by a raw, venomous hatred. Don't you dare speak about her like that. She's more of a woman than you've been in years. She understands me. She appreciates me. Something you forgot how to do when you became Saint Elara, the geniusio everyone bows down to. There was the festering resentment finally out in the open. My success was my crime. So you decided to prove your manhood by fucking a child and cutting corners on parts that killed 2 of our friends? I fired back. You're not a man, Kalen. You're a cliché. A pathetic, dangerous cliché. He took a step toward me, his hand raised. I didn't flinch. I stared him down, and something in my eyes must have warned him because he lowered his hand, a muscle twitching in his jaw. Get out, I said. Get out of this house. This is my house too, he snarled. Not for long, I promised him. He left then, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I stood alone in the wreckage of our dining room, listening to the sound of my daughter happily playing upstairs. The line had been drawn. The marriage was over. Now the real battle was beginning. I went to my study and unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was a file I'd started the day we incorporated Ethereum. It contained our original business plan, the first sketch I'd ever drawn of a car, and our signed founder's agreement. At the back, tucked away, was a personal document I'd had drawn up by a lawyer years ago. A private contingency plan I'd never thought I'd need. A postnuptial agreement, outlining the clear and separate division of our assets in the event of irreconcilable differences, heavily favoring me as the primary technical and intellectual driver of the company. It was time to update it. It was time to call my lawyer. And it was time to make my own moves. Kalen thought he was playing a game of corporate chess. But he'd forgotten who designed the board. The days after the dinner table explosion settled into a cold, silent war. Kalen moved out, ostensibly to a downtown apartment to be closer to the office during the crisis. A fiction we both maintained for Lily's sake. The house felt enormous and empty without his toxic presence, but it was a relief. The silence was no longer fraught. It was peaceful. I used the time to act. My first and most important visit was to a private trust lawyer, not the one who handled Ethereum's corporate affairs. I brought with me the updated postnuptial agreement and a mountain of financial documents. I want to liquidate everything, I told the lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Chen. Every share, every stock option, every liquid asset that is in my name or our joint names. I want it converted into cash and placed into an irrevocable trust. Miss Chin raised an eyebrow. That's a significant undertaking. And an irrevocable trust is, as it sounds, permanent. You're locking this wealth away for all intents and purposes. I'm aware, I said, my voice steady. The beneficiary is my daughter, Lily. The principal is to be locked away until her children come of age. She receives a generous annual interest payment for life. If anything happens to both of us, the entire estate is donated to pediatric cancer research. I named a specific charity in Milan, Marco's hometown. I was building a fortress around my daughter's future. Kalen and his mistress would never get their hands on a single cent of my life's work. It would all belong to Lily, protected from his greed and her avarice forever. The process took days. Signing endless documents, authorizing transfers, watching the in our joint accounts dwindle to zero while the trust fund swelled into a number so large it felt abstract. With each signature, I felt a piece of my old life fall away, and a new, steely resolve take its place. Simultaneously, I began the process I'd been dreading but knew was inevitable. I filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The petition, along with the postnuptial agreement, was delivered to Kalen's new apartment by a process server. His response was immediate and predictable. My phone blew up with furious calls and texts, each one more unhinged than the last. How dare you? You'll regret this. I'll fight you for every penny. He was screaming into the void. He didn't know yet about the trust. That particular explosion was still to come. I didn't respond to a single message. I had one more card to play, and it was the biggest one of all. The Milan Auto Expo was looming. The ruined Argo was a twisted secret, but Ethereum was still expected to have a presence. We had other cars. The production models were fine. Kalen's cost-cutting hadn't reached them yet. The plan was to ship them over along with a new hastily assembled concept car. A shell, really a non-functioning model meant to showcase design, not engineering. It was a pathetic shadow of what the Argo was meant to be, but it was all we had. Kalen, desperate to project an image of normalcy and control, decided he would lead the delegation to Milan. And of course he was taking Sloan. I learned this not from him but from a company-wide email he sent, listing the travel roster. Her name was right there under Executive Liaison. The day of their departure, I went to the loading bay to see the cars being carefully crated and loaded onto the specialized air freight transporters. It was a somber affair, a funeral procession for our ambitions. Kalen was there, overseeing everything with a pompous gravity. Sloan stood next to him, dressed in a ridiculously impractical white travel outfit, looking like she was headed to a resort, not a trade show. She clung to his arm, shooting me triumphant little glances. I walked over to them, my expression neutral. Kalen. A word. He looked annoyed but stepped away from Sloan, who pouted dramatically. I need you to sign these, I said, handing him a thick stack of documents. Expedited production orders for the spare parts we'll need for the Q4 push. The lawyers are waiting on them. It was a lie. The top document was legitimate, something boring about interior upholstery. The ones beneath it were the trust documents and the divorce papers. He barely glanced at them. He was distracted, eager to get on his plane, to play the big shot in Milan with his new woman on his arm. Can't this wait, Lara? I'm kind of in the middle of saving our company's reputation. It'll only take a second, I said, handing him a pen. You know how legal is. He sighed, exasperated, and scrawled his signature on the dozen or so flagged pages without reading a single word. He was so arrogant, so sure of his own superiority, that it never occurred to him I would dare to trick him. He handed the stack back to me. There. Happy? He said, his tone dripping with condescension. Ecstatic, I replied, my heart hammering against my ribs. I had it. His signature. On everything. The trust was now irrevocable. The divorce was uncontested. He had just signed away his entire future. He turned back to Sloan, putting an arm around her. Ready, my dear? Time to show the world what Ethereum is made of. They swept away, leaving me standing there holding the documents that contained their ruin. I felt no joy, only a cold, clean sense of finality. I went back to my office and immediately called the bank and my lawyer. It's done, I said. Execute it all. Now. Then I called Leo. The cars they're shipping to Milan. The production models. I want you to personally oversee one final quality check. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Alara? They've already passed QA. They're sealed in their crates. I know, I said, staring out the window at the departing freight trucks. Check them again. And Leo, be very, very thorough. I hung up. The first part of my plan was complete. Kaylin was financially neutered. Now for the second part. It was time to show the world what Ethereum was really made of. Not under Kaylin's leadership, but under mine. And if that meant tearing it all down to save its soul, then so be it. The silence in the house after Kaylin and Sloane left for Milan was a profound relief. It was just me and Lily, and for a few days we played hooky. We built forts in the living room, had picnics in the garden, and I read to her for hours. It was a necessary balm for both of us. I needed to remember what I was fighting for, and she needed to remember that her mother was still present. But the outside world didn't stop. Leo kept me updated. Kaylin was in Milan, playing the magnificent leader, giving interviews about innovation and resilience, all while Sloane preened beside him in various couture outfits, undoubtedly paid for with his ill-gotten kickbacks. The media, ever fawning, ate it up. Ethereum's power couple. One headline read, "The irony so thick it was nauseating." Back at headquarters, however, the mood was grim. The initial shock of the explosion had worn off, replaced by a low hum of anxiety. Whispers about the supplier changes were spreading, thanks to Leo's discreet digging. Morale was plummeting. People were scared. They knew something was fundamentally wrong. Then the first email arrived. It was from a mid-level manager in the procurement department, sent directly to me and blind copied to a half-dozen other senior staff. It laid out, in meticulous detail, the pattern of supplier changes authorized by Kaylin Reed. It included cost comparisons, the damningly low-quality ratings of the new vendors, and even pointed questions about the ownership of the shell companies. It was a bomb. Kaylin's absence had created a power vacuum, and the truth was rushing in to fill it. More emails followed. From quality assurance, confessing they'd been pressured to approve substandard parts. From finance, questioning the massive unexplained payments to the families of the deceased engineers. The dam was breaking. I didn't respond to any of them directly. Instead, I had Leo schedule an all-hands meeting for the entire company. It was time to take control of the narrative. The morning of the meeting, I dressed with care. A sharp black suit. Hair pulled back. No nonsense. I wasn't the grieving widow or the betrayed wife today. I was the CEO. The auditorium was packed, every face tense with anticipation. The buzz of conversation died the moment I walked on stage. 1,000 pairs of eyes watched me, filled with fear, confusion, and a desperate need for leadership. I didn't use notes. I spoke from the heart and from a place of cold, hard fact. I know you've all heard the rumors, I began, my voice clear and carrying through the silent room. I know you're afraid. You have every right to be. What happened in the prototype bay was not an accident. It was a preventable tragedy caused by a catastrophic failure of leadership and ethics. You could have heard a pin drop. Over the past several months, President Reed, without my knowledge or consent, initiated a systematic program of sourcing substandard parts from unvetted suppliers. A screen behind me lit up, showing the damning purchase order, his signature clear as day. A collective gasp went through the crowd. He did this for personal profit, funneling kickbacks through shell companies. More documents flashed on the screen. He bypassed every safety protocol we ever put in place. He lied to me. He lied to you. And his actions resulted in the deaths of Arthur Chin and Marco Rossi. The silence was now heavy with anger. I saw fists clenching, jaws tightening. Arthur and Marco were beloved. He then used company funds to buy the silence of their families, attempting to cover up his crimes. I let that hang in the air for a moment. I have filed for divorce. I have also, as majority shareholder and CEO, initiated proceedings to remove Kaylin Reed from his position and from the board of directors. The evidence has been turned over to the SEC and the Justice Department. The room erupted. It wasn't cheers. It was a roar of validation, of fury, of released tension. They had needed a villain, and I had given them one. And I had given them a leader who was finally telling them the truth. This company was built on a promise of excellence and integrity, I said, my voice rising above the din. that promise was broken. But it is not lost. Our work now is not just to build cars. It is to rebuild trust. To honor the memories of Arthur and Marco by being better. By being the company they believed in. I outlined an immediate plan. A full voluntary recall of every model that contained any of the suspect parts. A 100% audit of every supplier, every component. An amnesty program for any employee who felt pressured to cut corners. It would cost billions. It would be a PR nightmare. But it was the only way. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. It was the sound of a company choosing its soul over its stock price. As I stepped off the stage, my phone buzzed. It was Kalen. The news had clearly reached Milan. I declined the call. He called again. And again. Then the text started, a torrent of screaming, furious vitriol. He knew. He knew I'd moved against him. He knew his kingdom was crumbling. I didn't care. For the first time in weeks, I felt clean. I felt in control. I went back to my office and called Lily's school. I'm taking my daughter out of class early today, I told them. We're going to the zoo. The war wasn't over. But I had just won a major battle. And it was time to celebrate with the only person who truly mattered. The fallout from my all-hands meeting was instantaneous and volcanic. While I was at the zoo with Lily watching her laugh at the monkeys, my phone blew up with calls from reporters, investors, and board members. The story was everywhere. Ethereum CEO accuses president of murderous fraud. Inside the Ethereum scandal, the House of Reed comes crashing down. Kalen, stranded in Milan, was apparently holed up in his hotel room, refusing to speak to the press. His attempts to spin the story, claims that I was unstable, that I was orchestrating a coup out of jealous spite, were drowned out by the tidal wave of evidence now flooding out of Ethereum. Whistleblowers felt empowered to speak and the narrative solidified. He was a greedy, corrupt man who had killed for profit. I kept Lily away from it all. We had our zoo day, then I enrolled her in a new, more secure private school under just my name, Vance. I moved us out of the monstrous Hillsborough house and into a sleek, modern penthouse apartment in a secure building in the city. It was a fresh start, a fortress for just the two of us. Meanwhile, the legal machinery I had set in motion began to grind. The board, terrified of liability, voted unanimously to remove Kalen from his position, citing gross misconduct. The SEC froze his assets pending investigation. The divorce papers, uncontested thanks to his own hasty signature, were fast-tracked. And then it was the eve of the Milan Auto Expo press conference. Ethereum's booth, once meant to be a triumphant showcase, was now the scene of the most anticipated car crash in history. Media from around the world were gathered not to see cars but to see blood. I watched it live on my laptop in my new apartment, a cup of tea in my hand, a strange detachment settling over me. There was Kalen on the screen. He looked haggard, his expensive suit rumpled, his famous charm replaced by a sheen of nervous sweat. But he was still trying to perform. Sloane stood beside him, her face a mask of petulant confusion, dressed in a blindingly white, overly dramatic outfit that was entirely inappropriate for the occasion. She looked like a confused wedding guest. Kalen began his speech, sticking to the bland, corporate script about innovation and the future. The reporters in the audience shifted restlessly. Then he introduced the new replacement concept car. The Ethereum Phoenix, he announced with a flourish, rising from the ashes. The drapes were pulled back. The car was fine. A bland, inoffensive shell. But as Kalen continued speaking, a strange thing began to happen. As the beautiful models, hired by Sloane no doubt, got into the car to showcase the interior, the door one of them closed let out a loud, sickening crack. Then the side view mirror on another car simply fell off. On a third, the entire glossy body panel seemed to ripple and warp under the bright lights, revealing the cheap, flexible plastic underneath. It was a slow-motion implosion. Not a fiery explosion like the Argo, but a pathetic, crumbling disintegration. The models' smiles became fixed masks of panic as bits of the car literally came off in their hands. The crowd began to titter, then laugh outright. Camera flashes went off like fireworks, capturing every humiliating detail. Kalen stood frozen, his mouth agape, his speech forgotten. Sloane just looked annoyed, as if the cars were ruining her big moment. Then a reporter shouted a question, breaking the spell. President Reed, is this the quality we can expect from Ethereum's new suppliers? Another yelled, Is this the phoenix or the turkey? The dam broke. A cacophony of questions erupted, all about the suppliers, the kickbacks, the dead engineers. Kalen tried to bluster, to deny, but he was shouted down. The scene descended into chaos. Live on global television, the president of Ethereum Motors was being publicly eviscerated. I saw him turn to Sloane, say something sharp. She snapped back at him, her face contorted in anger. It was a perfect, beautiful, horrifying disaster. I had given the order to Leo, a final, thorough quality check. My team had ensured that every single part Kalen had corrupted would fail. Spectacularly. Publicly. It was the only way to salt the earth, to ensure his poisonous influence could never take root again. I closed my laptop. I didn't need to see any more. My phone rang. It was Leo. It's done, he said, his voice a mixture of awe and horror. It's done, I agreed. There was a pause. Alara, there's one more thing. I just got a call from a source. Sloane, she's not just a mistress. She's pregnant. The news should have felt like a final blow. But it didn't. It felt inevitable. Another life entangled in his web of destruction. I see, I said, my voice flat. And, Leo hesitated. My source says she's been asking around. About you. About Lily. About the trust fund. She's angry. And desperate. You should be careful. A new kind of chill, one I hadn't felt before, settled over me. This wasn't about corporate warfare anymore. This was personal. This was about my child. Thank you, Leo, I said, my mind already racing. I'm always careful. I hung up and walked to Lily's room. She was sleeping peacefully, her stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms. I watched her for a long time, the weight of my next decision settling on my shoulders. Kalen was finished. Sloane was a sideshow. But a desperate animal is the most dangerous kind. The public detonation was over. Now the private war for our lives was about to begin. The news from Milan was a Category 5 shitstorm, and the winds were blowing all the way back to California. Kalen and Sloane were forced to flee the expo under a hail of ridicule and shouted questions, their reputations in tatters. The video of the Ethereum turkey falling apart was viral gold. The company's stock, already in free fall, was suspended from trading. The brand was a joke, a cautionary tale. I should have felt vindicated. I had exposed the truth and destroyed the man who betrayed me. But Leo's warning echoed in my head, turning any sense of victory into cold dread. She's pregnant. He's asking about Lily. About the trust. A desperate Sloane, backed into a corner with a child on the way and her meal ticket obliterated, was a predator. And she saw my daughter as a threat to her own child's inheritance. I acted immediately. I hired a private security detail for Lily, subtle but always present. I alerted her new school that under no circumstances was anyone but me or my designated security lead to pick her up. Our new apartment had a state-of-the-art system installed. I was building a fortress, but the fear was a low, constant hum in my blood. Kalen predictably tried to reach out. His calls shifted from fury to pleading. He was broke, his assets frozen, his name toxic. He was staying in a cheap hotel, he claimed. Sloane was hysterical, demanding money for the baby. Alara, you have to help me, he begged on a voicemail I didn't answer. It's still my child. Our children are siblings. You can't let my son want for anything. That trust, it's obscene. Lily will never need all that money. Be reasonable. Reasonable. The word was a spark to the tinder of my rage. He thought my daughter's future was a pie to be sliced up for his bastard child with his mistress. The man had no bottom. I didn't respond. I let my lawyer handle him, a wall of cold, legal impenetrability. Then the unthinkable happened. I got a call from Lily's school. My blood went cold before I even answered. The principal's voice was tense. Ms. Vance, Lily's father came to pick her up early today. He said it was a family emergency. Our records show shared custody, so we released her to him. The world dropped out from under me. Shared custody. In the frantic pace of the divorce, that detail had been overlooked, a temporary order still in place. Kalen had used it. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a picture of Lily sitting in the backseat of a car, her face confused but not yet scared. The text followed. A father has a right to see his daughter. We need to talk about the future. All our children's future. It was from Sloane. Rage, pure and incandescent, consumed me. He hadn't just taken her, he'd let her be a part of it. He'd handed my daughter over to that woman. I called the police immediately, reporting a custodial interference. But I knew that would take time. Then another text came through with an address. An abandoned industrial park on the outskirts of the city. Come alone. Bring proof the trust can be dissolved. Or we disappear with her. They weren't just desperate. They were stupid. And they had just made their final, fatal mistake. I didn't go alone. I called my security team. I called the police, giving them the address and instructing them to hang back. And I called Leo. I need a duffel bag. And I need you to go to the prop house we used for that commercial shoot last year. Get me 2 million in realistic prop hundreds. Now. An hour later I was driving to the rendezvous, a heavy duffel bag on the passenger seat. The prop money was perfect. From a distance it was utterly convincing. The industrial park was a graveyard of rust and concrete. I found them in a cavernous, empty warehouse. Kalen looked gaunt, desperate. Sloane stood beside him, her pregnant belly visible under her coat, her eyes gleaming with avaricious triumph. Lily was sitting on a dusty crate, her little legs swinging. When she saw me, her face lit up. "Mommy." "Stay there, baby," I said, my voice remarkably steady. I held up the duffel bag. "I have your money. Let her go." Sloane took a step forward. "Open it. Let me see." I unzipped the bag, showing the top layer of tightly packed $100 bills. Her eyes widened. Kalen looked sick, ashamed. "Tao, let her go," I repeated. "Bring it here," Sloane demanded. "Let her walk to me first." Kalen nodded almost imperceptibly, and Lily slid off the crate and ran to me, burying her face in my legs. I held her tight, my eyes never leaving them. "The bag," Sloane snapped. I tossed it at their feet. It landed with a satisfying thud. As they both lunged for it, greed overriding all sense, I grabbed Lily and ran for the warehouse entrance. "Hey!" Sloane screamed. "This is fake. It's all fake." I heard Kalen's roar of frustration. And then I heard the sirens. Blue and red lights flooded the entrance as I burst through the door with Lily in my arms. Police swarmed past us into the warehouse. I didn't look back. I held my daughter, sobbing into her hair as the sounds of shouting and struggle echoed behind us. It was over. The aftermath was a formality. Kalen and Sloane were charged with kidnapping, extortion, and a host of other crimes. His remaining assets were seized. Sloane, in a final act of betrayal, tried to cut a deal by testifying against him, revealing the full extent of his kickback schemes. They would both be going away for a very, very long time. She would have her child in prison. The divorce was finalized. I was granted full, sole custody of Lily. Ethereum Motors entered a controlled bankruptcy, its valuable patents and IP sold off to competitors. The name was retired, a scar on the industry's memory. I took a job as head of design at a young, ambitious electric car company run by an old rival, a man named Elias Thorne who had always respected my work more than my husband had. We worked remotely from our new city. Lily thrived, the shadows of that day in the warehouse slowly fading, though I knew they would never fully leave her. Sometimes, at night, I think about Arthur and Marco. I hope I honored them. I think about the company we built, the dream we shared. I miss it like a limb. But then I look at my daughter, sleeping safely in her bed, her future secure. I look at the new designs on my drafting table, clean and pure and uncompromised. I had to burn it all down to save what mattered. And from the ashes I didn't build another empire. I built a life. A quieter one. A safer one. It was enough. It was everything. The end.